Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. We are going to talk about additionality and impact investing. We are with our host, Samuel Baumgartner, as usual. And today we have Mariana Bernard with us from our technical assistance team. And now this has nothing to do with IT. It's called TA. She gets very angry if you get them confused. So just a reminder, everyone is muted today. So if you have a question, just type it into the chat function on the side of your screen. And we'll do our best to answer it at the end, or we'll get back to you later, or Samuel will get back to you later. All right, a little bit about responsibility. We are pioneers of impact investing. We invest in 3 sectors: financial inclusion, such as microfinance or fintech, sustainable food and agriculture across the whole value chain, and of course, climate finance, from green lending to commercial and industrial solar, and of course, energy access projects and much, much more. So I will hand over now to Samuel and Mariana, and I will come back for the Q&A at the end. All right, over to you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stacey, for the introduction. Welcome, a big welcome to the audience also from my side. Great to have so many of you guys listening in today. Also, a big welcome to Marianne. Thank you for taking your time to give us some insight of what you do and how this whole thing actually works. We've briefly touched on the topic of additionality when we were looking at the sustainability components and impact investing in one of the previous webinars, and where impact investing has a clear goal of actually achieving a developmental component. Also, additionality comes with that on board, where we then also seek to contribute to the development beyond just a financial contribution. To start off, I would like to ask you guys a question. This will allow Marianne and myself to get to know you guys a little bit better. And we would like to know from you guys, are you familiar with the term or with the concept of technical assistance, or TA as we call it? TA is the, as Stacey had mentioned in the introduction, the shortening for technical assistance. So I'd be quite curious to see how many of you guys already know this term or concept, and let's see what comes out here before we dive in together with Marianne.
We'll give it just a few more seconds. We're up to 75. Oh, it's coming. 80%.
So 1 or 2 people.
Can we get 100%?
Come on, guys.
Come on, vote. All right, I'm going to close the poll in 1 second, and closing. Share.
Awesome.
Yay.
Oh, wow. So
okay,
we
good.
have quite a nice group of you who already know what technical assistance means. So I think taking advantage that we have Marianne here joining the webinar, I would like to dive in with my first question to you, Marianne, and ask you, how did you get into technical assistance in the first place? What happened that you ended up there?
What happened? Well, first, hi everyone. Hi Sam, hi Stacey. So I got into TA, I think about 8 or 9 years ago. Back then I used to do consultancy work. I did that for several years actually. So I was the one implementing TA projects on behalf of other impact investors. And then I joined responsibility about 4.5 years ago. So now I'm actually on the other side of things. I'm the one hiring and paying the consultants.
Nice. And maybe following up, given that you've been around in this subject for quite a while, you could give our listeners also an idea of how does a typical day at the office or outside the office for you look like? I know you're not always at the office, you're also traveling quite a bit, but maybe you could give us some insights on how that looks.
Of course. So I actually spend most of my days managing super cool projects and spending money. So this is what I do. I guess that I have one of the best jobs out there and actually feel quite lucky. I mean, jokes aside, I think, TA is really a strong development tool, and I get to see the additionality of what I do through the projects that we manage every day. So that's pretty nice. I also get to deal with really interesting topics like, I mean, Stacey just mentioned them, climate finance, sustainable agriculture, gender, even more recently. So yeah, that's it in terms of content. And I'm not the only one, the lucky one in the company. Actually, I do share my burden with a team of people, and those are actually quite amazing and fun people. So those make my days quite nice in the office.
Yeah, I mean, spending money in a team sounds like a good proposition
That's a
for
dream job.
work.
Yeah. Yes.
Very nice. So maybe you could give us an example of what are some of the sexy cases that you're spending this money on with your technical assistance team to give us a bit of an insight of what this money is actually spent on.
Yeah, of course. So I do have actually quite a few of those really nice cases I can talk about. Maybe I can talk about this recent TA intervention that we launched for cooperatives in Peru. So maybe if you follow responsibility on the social media, you probably saw this article that was published, I think, last week. So that example is actually quite nice because it shows our capacity as TA to provide support to our investees on a very timely manner. So, when a few months ago the pandemic started to hit the developing countries and our countries of operations, we did conduct this assessment to try to understand what was the impact of the crisis on our investees. So it appeared that most of them were facing the exact same challenges in terms of accessing health and safety equipment, but also increasing transportation costs, for instance, or in some cases for those cooperatives, definitely a lack of awareness and information about the risks of the virus, ways to mitigate them, like social distancing, for instance. So the risks were actually pretty big, because we are then talking about potential disruptions of the agriculture value chain. So it means that if the farmers are not able to produce anymore because of the virus, or if the cooperatives cannot buy or process the productions, there's actually the livelihood of thousands of farmers that can be that is at risk. So we have been able to help them through a dedicated relief support funding to help them to overcome those challenges, make sure that they could keep their operations afloat. And in total, it's really nice because we'll be able to help up to 10 cooperatives and about 50,000 smallholder farmers through this intervention.
Wow, that's quite a reach. And I know you've told me before that when you guys look at these projects and do these studies, you usually go and visit the cooperatives or the locations where these studies are being done. I presume now, seeing that you're sitting in your home as well, like myself, with
Yes.
COVID, you're probably not traveling as much anymore. So how has that impacted the way that you guys are performing these studies and are interacting with your counterparties?
Yes, so we have been impacted, I mean, as you can understand. So, the project I've just mentioned, this one related to the COVID-19 crisis, this is quite a specific one. This is not we usually do with TA. We normally, through TA funds, we pay for, let's say, certain expertise that is needed for a project. So most often this is through hiring consultants. So this is how TA works most of the time. Those consultants can be, I don't know, energy specialists or agronomists, training experts sometimes. So in this specific case, when we did our assessment, it was pretty clear that our investees had to deal with very urgent challenges, and they did not necessarily have the capacity to deal with consultants in this specific case. And in any way, the consultants were not able to travel because of the travel restrictions. We were not able to travel either. So we've used this funding to provide support where it was most needed through a different mechanism. So I would say that the COVID-19 crisis kind of helped us to be more creative and definitely more responsive to what was happening on the ground.
Wow. So also to some extent an opportunity to fine tune maybe a couple of processes and to look at things from a different angle as well now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very interesting. And I mean, presumably we've also learned and talked about this in the previous webinar, the additionality of what you guys do with the technical assistance. Most impact investors have this or bring this service or approach. Maybe you could give us a bit of an example or an insight of how at Responsibility we differentiate ourselves from other impact investors, or maybe going into a bit more detail on how we go about this, about the technical assistance services.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I would say that the way we do TA at Responsibility, it's actually a very, I mean, we try to tailor TA as much as possible so that it, fits our investment and our impact strategies. So we do not do very large scale TA. We always try to make sure that our projects meet the exact needs of our investees at a certain time, and that we find the best expertise to implement those TA projects. So some people in the company, and you probably saw that in the last impact report, some people in the company think we are the Swiss Army knife of impact investing. I think this is actually quite true. The idea is that we are able to use our expertise to find the best solution for investees, and this is actually only possible because we work closely with a team of investment officers and energy specialists that are based in our regions, so very close to our investees, and they are the one that really help us assessing the precise needs at the beginning, but also they help us to monitor the progress of the project during the entire duration.
Okay. I mean, this sounds all very interesting, and especially the spending money part looks very attractive. But I presume you also have to kind of find the money that you can spend and be accountable to the people that give, or to the organizations that give money or finance these projects. And I'd be quite interested to know a bit more on how that process as well works, how you go about to collect the sponsorships, and how then these processes how these processes work with the approval and also with the accountability.
Yeah, so the donors they pay for the TA, so they play a major role in our capacity to deploy TA. When I said earlier that my work is about spending money, and well, the money comes from donors, and those donors are usually development banks, development agencies, sometimes even private foundations. So although I think I'm very good at spending money, this is not my money, and this is actually public money. So when we say we do TA, it's just not me and my teammates in the company going around and trying to spend money on consultants. All our projects actually have to be approved upfront by what we call our TA committees. So the TA committees are external committees. They are composed of representatives of our donors, and they are in charge of making sure that the projects that we bring and that we develop are in line with their development objectives. They trust us to channel this funding, and they do hold us accountable for managing this funding. So they challenge us beforehand, but also once the projects are completed.
Okay. And do you also go about to do sort of the similar kind of impact reporting that is done on the financing level, or do you have a different way to then report back on the results of what you do?
Yes, so as I was just mentioning, we do very tailor-made TAs. So it means that all projects usually have very specific key performance indicators. So we do track individual indicators for each of the projects, depending on the topic, if it's about climate finance, if it's about sustainable food, and so on. And we are now doing this work internally to try to harmonize the impact framework, and trying to measure the progress and the impact of those TA projects in line with the other indicators that we collect at the level of the company.
Okay, interesting. So I mean, I definitely see the value add for a company to be working with you guys on different projects from an operational perspective. How do companies go about to approaching you guys? Is this something that is only accessible for companies that are existing portfolio companies of responsibility investments, or are these also companies that are maybe not yet in it, or have nothing to do with the investment portfolio? How does that selection process work?
Yes, that's a good question. So we do a lot of what we call pre-investment TAs. So there, the TA interventions target our pipeline companies. So companies that are not yet in our portfolio investment, but that we have identified as having a great potential in terms of development, impact, and so on. So for instance, we would help those companies to explore new markets, diversify their activities, maybe sometimes strengthening their operations or make sure they comply with environmental and social standards, for instance. So this is actually quite key because in those cases, TA works as a way to reduce the risk profile of this investment. TA helps to get the projects off the ground and eventually to attract potential private investors in the game. So this is a little bit the idea behind, blended finance. Maybe some of you guys are familiar with the term, but the idea is really that we leverage public and philanthropic funding to make sure that we attract private investors and eventually are able to accelerate the achievement of sustainable development goals.
Interesting. So this could potentially also be companies that at the moment don't fulfill the circumstances.
Exactly. Yes,
but
and
for the
we help
future
we help them to access and reach this certain level of maturity and compliance that we need to be able to invest in those companies.
Okay, super interesting. Well, on this point, I would like to wrap up our little discussion. It was definitely very interesting. I've learned a lot. I would also like to now take advantage to open the floor to the attendees of our webinars, and go ahead and start firing questions at us. I hope we have been able to give you a little bit of an insight, but I'm sure there's plenty of questions to come. So I would like to take advantage and give the floor to our attendees. And I think Stacey will help us out here.
Yes, we have some questions here already. One impact of COVID-19 is that it is difficult to discover new consultants. I can imagine you go to the same consultants over and over because they are proven. How do you recommend someone break into this space? The industry seems quite closed.
Oh, I wouldn't say the industry is quite close, actually. I mean, we are working with a very large number of consultants because we need so many different type of expertise. So we are always very keen on discovering new ways to implement projects, and we are the way we hire consultants, we do have the usual suspects, the people that we know and then we work with because we know they are good, but we are always very keen in on discovering new talents, and then if you are one of them, don't hesitate, you can reach out to us.
Perfect. All right, here we go. I think you touched on this a bit, but maybe you can expand. Hello, is it possible to receive TA financing for a new project in order to make it investable for responsibility? If yes, what is the selection criteria?
So the selection criteria, so because again, TA is very much aligned with our investment strategy, the selection criteria would be first, our investment criteria. So is the company is the company operating in those topics that we are addressing through our investments? So climate finance, sustainable agriculture, sustainable food, or financial inclusion, that would be one. And then the best way to get TA would probably be to go through our team of investment officers that are in the regions that will do this pre-screening or pre-assessment of the company. And then we can have this TA conversation all together and see what will be the exact need of this company and see whether it makes sense that we plug our intervention or not.
Perfect. All right, next, how do you plan to measure TA projects' impact? Do you already have indicators in mind?
Yes, so we do have specific indicators for each of the projects. So for instance, when we do a project that is related to sustainable food and where the objective will be to, for instance, train smallholder farmers on, I don't know, organic practices, agricultural practices. For instance, the indicators there would be to understand, how many farmers have we been able to reach. Were we able to help them increasing their yields, their incomes as well? So those would be specific indicators for this project, but we would also have more overarching type of impact indicators that we will track throughout all the TA facilities and activities that we implement. An example would be, for instance, number of like direct beneficiaries or number of indirect beneficiaries, number of hectares sustainably cultivated. So as I mentioned earlier, we are building this impact framework where we could really embed both the TA and investment impact.
All right, perfect. Next question. What are the skill sets required to be on the technical assistance team?
You need to be fun. That's the very first criteria. No, I think there are quite a few. I think I mean, what we do in the TA team, we are project managers. So I'm not energy specialist. I'm not an agronomist, but I need to understand, what is needed and try to anticipate what might come, because sometimes we have like projects that can last 5 years, for instance, and you need to anticipate this at the very beginning when you develop the project. So you need to have this mindset and definitely some sort of creativity and flexibility in the way you address those interventions. I'm not sure if it
Excellent.
answers. Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get lots of applications for your team down there.
Yes. We are full.
Next question. What are the main areas that you find companies lack in order to be investable?
We do a lot of projects that are around capacity building. So, governance type of issues, to be able to run a company that will be able to grow sustainably, you need to have certain management skills and strategic vision. So we do a lot of those type of projects like capacity building, supporting, the development of strategies and business development and so on. There's a lot of projects that we do that also around environmental and social risk management. I think for many companies, this is somehow taken for granted. It is not, and that the impact investing world has been growing. The standards out there are more and more stringent. So we're also helping a lot of those companies to understand those standards and develop the internal systems and processes that will help them to improve their practices.
Excellent. All right, next question. How important is TA to your investors, such as are reports required, or is it something institutional investors ask about?
How important TA is for our investors, I would say, I mean, I did mention that a little bit earlier, but I think TA is a great way to reduce the risk profile of an investment. We are talking about very different amounts. TA, I think on average, the amount for TA project is around, I'd say, $30,000 to $50,000, while our investment could be between 1 and, I don't know, 15 million. So this is really not the same type of intervention, but that intervention that we will plug at the very beginning will help us as investment managers, but also our investors, to get the necessary level of comfort and confidence that the investment strategy can be deployed.
Perfect. All right, next question. You mentioned you are looking at harmonizing the impact framework. Would you have any additional insights to share as to how you're going about this?
Yes, so I actually would have to ask my colleague Paul, because he's really the one managing this. I mean, we are doing this it's actually a work in progress. We are working on these indicators. We are trying to see, I mean, this is always the tricky thing, right? There are many indicators that we can collect and report on, but then you kind of increase the data collection burden on the eventual beneficiaries or investees. So we are trying to streamline this. This is not easy because, as you can understand, we have different donors and different investors that have to receive and collect different type of data. So we are trying to streamline this. This is not an easy exercise, but we are doing this currently. Yeah, I mean, to give you maybe more precise information, I think one of the baseline will be probably to try to stick to a common language, and probably the SDGs could be one of them.
Perfect. Next question. I can imagine the assistance differs from sector to sector and geography to geography. How does a small team assess and deal with the very varied requirements?
How do we deal with this? So we are actually quite a small team of TA people, TA officers, but we do rely on our colleagues that are more on the ground. So the investment officers and the energy specialists mostly that are based in the different regions. So we have people in Lima, Peru, we have people in India, we have people in Nairobi, Kenya. So we rely on them to, I mean, they are a little bit our eyes and ears. And they are the one, because they manage the relationship with the investees, they are the one that can really feed us with what is needed. So this is how we work. We do rely a lot on those people.
Perfect. Next question. What is your favorite project that you've ever worked on?
My favorite project, it's actually, I think, Samuel, you did mention that one actually during the very first webinar. That's a project that we launched a couple of years ago in Bolivia for a quinoa processor that is actually one of our investees. And this quinoa processor, they source quinoa from smallholder farmers, producers locally, and we have helped them through different type of intervention. But the one challenge they were facing is that the place where the quinoa is grown is actually that place that is very let's say subject to wind erosion. So you can imagine that you have plantations or fields of quinoa that are being hit and hurt by the wind and the sand, and obviously that affects the yield of the producers and their income. So we did launch this project a couple of years ago to help them not only fight the effect of wind erosion on their plantations, but also to revive and regenerate the land through capacity building and training to farmers to help them to improve the quality of the soil. And this is all the more important because we saw the quinoa has become quite trendy and famous since 10 years. So this kind of had impacted the way producers were growing quinoa at the first place, and because of requirements to meet the demand, they started to produce the quinoa more and more intensively. So this kind of also decreased the quality of the soil. So we are working with them on different aspects, and I thought it was a really nice project to work on. And I haven't been able to visit the project yet, but I hope that I will be able to do so sometime this year or next.
All right, thank you so much, Mariana and Samuel. This is the end. If anyone has further questions left over, Samuel will write to you at some point to answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much. Follow us on LinkedIn for further webinars. Make sure you download the handout on the right-hand side, which has some more info on TA and also our climate report from 2019. Otherwise, we wish you a wonderful day and see you next time, hopefully. Bye.
Thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Marianne and Stacy. Have a good afternoon.
Ciao.
Bye.